Calls are mounting for accountability and consequences regarding Iran's naval activities in South African waters. The international community, led by a resurgent maximum pressure campaign from the United States of America, is moving beyond diplomatic condemnation toward tangible economic and military repercussions. Let's talk about this with Dr. Oscar van Heerden from the Center for African Diplomacy at the University of Johannesburg. A very good afternoon to you, Dr. van Heerden. Thank you very much for your time. Some of the reports, perhaps one should say, have actually been confusing. Confusing because we have had, as a country, and the ANC as the leading party in the country, has had a relationship with Iran. I want us to start there first. You know, before then, that relationship precedes everything we've read about, especially in the past week.
Yeah, good day, Vuyo, and to your viewers. That relationship does go far, indeed, and in very much the same way as we see today the Iranian government being in solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza and in Palestine because of the settler colonial occupation of the Israeli state. In much the same ways, consistently so, the Iranians also supported the liberation movement during the anti-apartheid struggles in South Africa. Had a relationship with the African National Congress, with the Pan-African Congress, and so on. So that relationship goes far, and it extended not only in symbolic support, but of course also in material support in the form of money and all other means to try and advance the anti-apartheid struggle. So you are right. There is a history to the relationship between South Africa as ANC and Iran. And of course, as soon as democracy dawned in 1994, South Africa was quick to formalize bilateral relations with the Islamic State of Iran.
Which is why then it sounds a bit odd when it is claimed that, or suggested, that South Africa now has a different attitude towards Tehran.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I don't know where that comes from. I think anyone who's peddling that is not taking cognizance of that particular history. You know, our trade with Iran is not necessarily vast, but in terms of oil, we've always had strategic relations with Iran in terms of our strategic oil reserves and so on. So it would be disingenuous to want to talk about there being a different relationship with Iran now. You know, not everyone agree with the theocracy and the government of Iran as it is, but the truth of the matter is that there is some semblance of democracy in Iran. There's an elections, people vote for a president and for a government. There's a cabinet. Yes, the clerics are ultimately in control after the revolution and the fall of the Shah, who ruled with brutality, and that the supreme leader is indeed the cleric Khamenei. So people don't always agree with that form of governance, just like they don't agree with the form of governance in the People's Republic of China, for example. But it is a different kind of model that the people of Iran has embraced.
And with that history in mind and with everything you said so far, Dr. van Heerden, it doesn't make sense then that officials would essentially, defy the president, which would probably, as some people have suggested, amount to a coup if indeed it was to be true that they defied the president and went and did their own thing, which went against what the president had actually ordered.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we'll have to wait and see with regards to the inquest. I don't think that it's necessarily an open defiance of direct orders from the president, who is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. I think it's perhaps best explained as a miscommunication, speaking cross purposes, perhaps. Remember, from where I'm sitting, Vuyo, these naval exercises have been planned a long time in advance. Who would have known that by the time it takes place, it would coincide with the Appropriates and Means Committee of the United States Congress deciding our fate with AGOA. No one could have made that prediction, but it so happened that it does clash in terms of the calendar, and I think that's why, to try and alleviate the tension already that exists between ourselves and the United States, the president perhaps gave that instruction that it would be best if the Iranian vessels don't participate actively in the drill and in the exercises. But as I say, there might have been a miscommunication or cross purposes, but I would be very surprised if at the end of the day, the inquest finds that the top brass of the Navy simply ignored the commander-in-chief of the armed forces.
But would America's attitude and our frosty relations with them, which we have seen playing themselves out, especially in the past year, would that be enough for the president to, perhaps for lack of a better, if indeed this was to be true, to make an about turn or to ask, the chiefs of the army to kind of tone down or reduce Iran's participation in these drills, which you say, they had been working on, because these things take a while to actually work on. Would that be enough? Would that relationship, our frosty relationship with the U.S., be enough for a president to say, maybe we should just rethink Iran's participation in these drills?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't want to really get into the realm of speculation, Vuyo, because I think that we can safely assume. Remember the controversy that was there when our generals went to Iran sometime last year, supposedly spoke out of turn. One can conclude perhaps that is where there was an agreement about the naval exercises. And then the naval exercises happened. What coincided, as I said, was significant disruptions and protests back in Tehran, in Iran, whilst these exercises were to take place. And also from a South African point of view, the issue of the AGOA agreement coming under the spotlight in the United States. To your question, though, I think what is important, and this is the question that we must ask, to what extent should the president or the South African government allow a foreign country to dictate to South Africa about foreign policy choices? If there is a foreign policy choice that we want to do exercises with Russia, China, Iran, and so on, does it behove the United States to want to bully us and cajole us to say that you are not allowed to do so? I think that is the more important question that is at play here.
Well, another question some people are asking, of course, is if we are bold or courageous enough to confront what's happening in Gaza to the point of taking Israel to the ICJ, why can't we take a similar position to Iran? I mean, in the case of Iran, which a lot of people are having issues with regard to human rights abuses there.
Yeah, I think that people are wanting to see ghosts where there are none. I think we need to do a separation between the geopolitical dynamics and tension that is there between ourselves and the United States and these naval exercises. The rationale that the South African Navy put forward for these naval exercises, and I have no reason to doubt that is indeed the rationale, is to have these exercises in order to coordinate and protect the Indian Ocean sea route in terms of piracy, in terms of people that are plundering natural resources in our territorial waters, and so on and so forth. And this is what these exercises are really about, in order to maintain peace on the Indian Ocean. And all the countries that are participating are present within that Indian Ocean sea route. So I think people are reading too much into it. It's certainly not a South African Navy that is wanting to send a political message to Washington, D.C. I don't think that is the case. I think these were planned long ago. We have had naval exercises with European partners, with the United States themselves on occasion. And so I don't see how this suddenly is seen as a political statement on the part of the South African Navy. I don't think that is the case. I think it is sensational that people are making that connection. And I think that we should really wait for the inquest to find out whether indeed there was a willful, intentional denial and adherence to the instruction from the president.
Well, I was taking that sort of, last questions, deliberate question rather, deliberately out of the drills themselves to really putting out there what to some people appears to be a contradiction, that you would kiss, someone and spit at the other, perhaps not to the same extent and all of that, but who, as far as certain people are concerned, are just as guilty of human rights abuse as many other people that we or South Africa may be spitting at.
No, and I don't want to get into that discussion necessarily, Vuyo. The truth is that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that is making the rounds. I'm one of those political analysts that say that if a people are indeed fed up and not okay with the government of the day, then they will rise up. They will rise up and they will overthrow that government. They will vote them out, or they will have mass protests, color revolutions that we've seen in Egypt and elsewhere in the world. People protest. Now, of course, these protests that happened in Iran recently started out very genuinely. There was dissent in terms of the economy, in terms of the currency, and so on. But it took a violent turn within the third or fourth day of the protest, and suddenly Iranian police officers were being shot and murdered, 180 ambulances burned, police stations being attacked, and so on and so forth. A very, very much a coordinated violence that suddenly gripped the protests. And of course, the government responded, like any government. You would recall, even here in South Africa, when 2 or 3 of our police officers were brutally hacked to death in Marakane, the response from the government, which was completely unacceptable and not within measure. And I think this is something similar that happened within Iran. But as to whether there's gross human rights violations and so forth, I'm not entirely convinced that that is the case. It's as they say, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And so there's a lot of disinformation that's going around with regards to Iran.
Dr. Oscar van Heerden, let me thank you very much for your time. He's from the Center for African Diplomacy at the University of Johannesburg.